Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Scientists are empowering T cells in their fight against cancer. Hello and welcome to Advanced Studio Classroom. I am Joe, and joining me today, I feel like we have a laboratory today. I have Dr. Josh.
Well, thank you. I'm not exactly a doctor, but I do play one on the radio sometimes.
That's right. And also joining us in the laboratory, we have Dr. Rebecca.
I'm happy to be here. I'm not a real doctor, but it's cool to be called Dr. Rebecca.
There we go, just for this once.
Yes.
We're actually in our second day of the science article, and this is a pretty heavy topic in terms of the technical terms that you learn here. The ideas are a little bit different, especially if you, like me, don't come from a microbiology background or a very strong science background. But the kind of research that's happening here, I think, impacts all of us. It's dealing with immunotherapy. And so I've invited Josh and Rebecca to try to do a quick kind of recap on what we worked on yesterday.
Sure. So let me just start off with talking about immunotherapy. So immunotherapy is a branch of medicine that deals with working with the body's natural immune system in order to deal with diseases. So we all have immune systems, and they can all do a lot of great work, but sometimes they need help, and that's what immunotherapy is all about, is working with the immune system in order to treat diseases. But we're talking specifically about fighting cancer with the body's natural immune system. So we talked about two scientists who are doing independent work in immunotherapy regarding cancer, and one we talked about yesterday was a man named James Allison, that's right, and he worked on the T cells and training those T cells in order to fight cancer cells.
So what exactly is Allison trying to accomplish, Rebecca?
Allison is trying to use a protein on the T cell, and that protein is called CTLA4. And as we explained yesterday, the CTLA4 protein, basically, the T cell, first of all, is the fighter cells. The T cell, when there's a foreign substance or a virus or something bad, the T cell will attack it and kill it. But the protein, the CTLA4 protein, tells the T cell to stop. Now, we need to review what cancer is. Cancer is basically your own body's cells, but these are bad cells, and they keep reproducing. And because these are your own body's cells, the T cells usually do not attack those cells. They think those are good cells, but cancer cells, of course, are not good cells. So in Allison's research, what he's trying to do is he's trying to get the CTLA4 protein to not break. CTLA4 protein acts like a brake. He's trying to get the CTLA4 protein to not do its job, to not be a brake, so the T cells can keep killing. They can keep killing off those bad cancer cells that we don't want.
That is a really good, very clear summary. I should have brought a lab coat for you. I feel like I've done you a disservice, Dr. Rebecca.
Thank you. I think it's the doctor name. When you call us Dr. Rebecca and Dr. Josh, suddenly our IQ becomes like 170.
It's right through the roof.
Yes.
And this is something that is very interesting. And so we're going to be looking a little bit more at what Allison has done to push this idea forward, because we learned yesterday this idea started all the way in the 1990s. Now they're getting this award. They got this award in 2018. So this is quite a long journey, and we're going to be learning a bit more about that journey and the things that have happened along the way. And so we're going to get into our first reading, talking a little bit more about, how the pharmaceutical industry responded to all of this.
The pharmaceutical industry showed little interest in these initial findings. But by 2010, Allison's persistent efforts to apply this approach to humans could no longer be ignored. Consider advanced melanoma, a diagnosis that, for virtually all patients, would lead to death within a year. One of Allison's landmark clinical studies showed that close to half of those who received the treatment were still alive a year later. Many would go on to live for years. Around the time Allison was making early strides on his work in California, Tasuku Honjo was performing a series of elegant experiments on a related immune system mechanism in his lab at Kyoto University in Japan.
So you have this big breakthrough, and you think the pharmaceutical industry is going to go nuts about your discovery. But what happened, Rebecca?
Well, basically, in the beginning, the pharmaceutical industry wasn't interested. Here it says the pharmaceutical industry showed little interest in the early stages.
Right, so these initial findings didn't seem to really grab that industry. In pharmaceutical, we talk about things that are just connected with production of medicines. You think about pharmacy, pharmacists, pharmaceutical, medicine. And Allison didn't give up, though, Josh.
No, so here it says that by 2010, which is quite a bit later, that his persistent efforts to apply this approach to humans could no longer be ignored.
Right, and so Allison continued to do the research, continued to show the viability of this approach, and eventually, I guess, the pharmaceutical industry had to listen.
I think they had to listen because many of these trials were very successful, and the pharmaceutical industry usually isn't interested if you just do one or two experiments. But if you have many, many successful trials and there is potential to make drugs out of your discovery, then the pharmaceutical industry, like any other industry, needs to make a lot of money. So they become very, very interested.
Right. And so down below, we get an example of how this kind of works. So what's the example that we're given?
Well, here we're going to talk about one type of cancer, and this is advanced melanoma. And here, it explains that a diagnosis for this type of cancer usually means that virtually all or almost every patient who has this diagnosis would then die within a few years, or within a year. So melanoma is a type of skin cancer. It involves the skin cells that normally produce a dark color, dark pigment. We call them maybe the moles that you get on your skin.
Right.
When those particular cells turn cancerous, and when it becomes very advanced, that this is a very lethal or deadly type of cancer.
And so here, Allison's landmark clinical studies showed that close to half of those who received the treatment were still alive. Now, this landmark, is something that's significant. It's important. It's a really big deal. And what exactly is a clinical study, Rebecca?
Well, a clinical study is basically a study usually dealing with sick people. It's a medical work that deals with the examination and treatment of sick people. So these clinical studies usually means there's probably cancer patients who are involved in Allison's study.
Right. So we're not looking at lab mice anymore, right, Josh?
Exactly. That's the most important distinction with a clinical study is that it's not animals, it is now actual people.
Moving on up, as it were. And so what's amazing is that, right, half of the people who received it were still alive a year later. Now, you might think to yourself, 50% is not so great, but actually, that's pretty amazing for a new drug.
Yeah, for a new drug, 50% is extremely high. It's a very, very good success rate.
And not only were some still alive a year later, it seems that many would go on to live for years, which is very encouraging.
Especially for this type of cancer where the diagnosis means if you have this advanced stage of melanoma, that almost everyone dies within a year.
So just having even a 50% survival rate, I think, is a really big encouragement. It's a very good step in the right direction. Now, around this time, so Allison's working on his drug and was making early strides. He's making the early bit of progress in California. There was one other person doing similar work.
There's a scientist in Japan called Tasuku Honjo. He was also doing experiments on an immune system mechanism. And he is in Kyoto University in Japan. So a completely separate lab halfway around the world. But they come to similar conclusions, even though they examine different proteins.
What I find really interesting here is the word that's modifying experiments. Elegant. What do you think's going on with that, Josh?
Well, that's a really good question. So when something is elegant, it's refined, it's beautiful, it's graceful. So here they are also talking about the nature of his experiments, not just being interesting, but also having a certain sort of grace to them.
Amazing. I don't think I would have ever imagined that experiments could be elegant, but we're going to be looking more into what his discovery was and what he was doing in our next reading.
Honjo's discovery. In 1992, Honjo had discovered PD-1, another protein expressed on the surface of T cells. His experiments were showing that, like CTLA-4, PD-1 constrains the wrath of T cells. When its function was disrupted in animal experiments, the immune system went after cancer and kept doing so, often until it disappeared. By 2012, a key study demonstrated that targeting PD-1 was effective in the treatment of patients with several different types of cancer. Today, multiple immunotherapy drugs that block PD-1 have been approved by the FDA. While their cost and their safety remain concerns, they have transformed the treatment of cancers of the skin, lungs, and more.
So, much like Allison, Honjo started way back in the 90s.
Right. So, but he is then looking at a different protein, so PD-1, which is expressed on the surface of T cells.
Right. And so this is a different kind of protein, but apparently it has a similar function to the protein we were talking about yesterday, CTLA-4.
Yeah, PD-1 actually acts in a similar way, and it actually acts as a brake to the T cells. Here it uses another word. It uses the word constrain. When you constrain something, maybe you make it not as effective, or you slow it down, or you stop it. So PD-1, it acts as a brake.
Right. And here we're back to that wrath of T cells. It's such a vivid description. And so just like Rebecca mentioned, it constrains those T cells. It holds them back from doing their function. And it seemed like when the function was disrupted in animal experiments, it seemed to have an effect.
Right, so the immune system then went after cancer and kept doing so, often until it disappeared. So this is another instance where a normal protein on a T cell is being manipulated so that it will trick the T cell into attacking a cancer cell.
This is honestly just kind of stepping back. Again, not an expert in microbiology or any of these related fields, but I think something like this is so incredible. Like just this idea that you find a protein that's on the surface of the T cell, you modify it, and it completely changes how you respond. It's
actually really incredible. It's basically you're tricking your body to do something it otherwise wouldn't have done. It's really brilliant.
It's kind of mind-blowing. And, underneath all of the technical terms, it's such a simple concept.
It is such a simple concept of using the body's own immune response in order to attack cells that are causing the body damage, right?
And so here, and just seeing that it was so effective and it was attacking the cancer often until it disappeared. So we're talking about a very high level of effectiveness, right?
Yeah, this is very, very effective.
And so we do a bit of a time jump, and now it's 2012. It's 2012, and they have this key study that demonstrated something.
So here we're talking about this type of treatment, demonstrating that it's very effective in dealing with certain types of cancer. So, and several different types of cancer. So this is most likely different cancers than the other procedure that we talked about with Allison, although the article doesn't make it clear. But once again, I just want to remind everyone that the immune system is a very complicated system, and there are a lot of factors that go into the immune system. So here we're talking about another aspect of the immune system, another protein in the immune system, where blocking that protein then has effectiveness in attacking different types of cancer cells.
Right. And so here, today apparently there have been now multiple immunotherapy drugs that block this protein, and it's actually gotten approved by the FDA.
The FDA, this is a good term for us. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S., and basically all food products and all drugs, all the medicines, they have to be approved by the FDA before they can go on the market for the public to use. And I think in most countries in the world, they all have similar agencies like the FDA.
It's kind of interesting because over the past 2 days, we've referenced twice the fact that both of these researchers started in the 90s.
Yes.
And then you get a sense of just how long this process is to produce any kind of drug.
Right. So we're talking easily about 20 years.
And it's just incredible. And what exactly kind of like slows that process up?
Well, I think the process is very, very long because first you have to start, like in the beginning, yesterday we read, you start from mice. You start in the lab. And then after mice, often we move on to bigger animals that are more closely related to humans. Perhaps these could be monkeys or they could be other primates that are more related to humans. And then later on, when all those trials are considered safe, usually you move to the clinical studies we talked about earlier, where you run the studies on people who are usually very, very sick. And then if the clinical trials are successful, you continue running these trials until you're very, very sure that this treatment, the pros outweigh the cons, and you minimize the risk. And then it can go to market. So for these pharmaceutical companies or for the people who develop the drugs, it's a very, very long and expensive process.
Right. I've often heard that companies that are working now to get these sorts of drugs approved, they have to work very, very hard just to even find the funding to get through the trial process.
Well, so there are a lot of things that go into producing pharmaceuticals for human use or even animal use. But one of the problems, of course, is funding because it takes a lot of money in order to do the research, in order to get through all these stages of development, in order to produce studies that can be peer-reviewed by other people in order to make sure that it's effective. And there's no money that comes in from any of these steps until much, much further down the road when maybe it can be turned into a treatment that can be picked up by a pharmaceutical and used broadly for everyone. So certainly the funding in order to keep the research going is always a consideration.
Right. I guess that's why drugs, when they initially roll out onto the market, are so expensive.
It's true. And one more thing regarding why it takes so long. Another thing is for clinical studies, because you're working with human beings and human life is very, very valuable. The government has many regulations on how to conduct the trials. So these studies take a long time because, for example, if I run a clinical study and then let's say 80% of the people in the study die, then this study will probably be stopped.
Right. 80% is probably not successful enough.
Yes, but we have to understand that with a lot of new drugs and treatments, sometimes the success ratio is very low in the beginning. And you have to keep modifying the drug until it really, really works on humans. So due to a lot of government regulations, this process can take a long time.
Right. I'm sure the government regulations being there are important, though.
Oh, certainly are very important. And of course, you wouldn't want any kind of claim to some sort of medical success that wouldn't be proven, that would be safe to go through without any sort of rigorous research being done and also regulation being done by a government agency.
Right, because even here, the two researchers that we have and that we're discussing over the past 2 days, they clearly have shown success. But apparently, even though they've transformed the treatment of cancers of the skin and lungs and even more, there's still concerns, Rebecca.
Yeah, there's concerns both on cost and safety. Here it says, even though they have transformed the treatment of cancers, but there's still cost and safety concerns as well.
Right. I imagine, if you start fiddling with someone's their immune system, that even if you know what you're doing, there's still some risks involved.
Well, certainly. I mean, we talked before about autoimmune diseases. So when you have the immune system attacking things that are considered normally healthy tissue, that can cause some real serious problems. And here we are messing with the mechanism that would normally stop your immune system from attacking healthy tissue. So there could be some very serious complications that comes from some of this therapy. But I think that's also why a lot of the studies here are targeting cancers that would normally be fatal.
Right. You focus on those really fatal ones and start to see the efficacy, the effectiveness of those drugs. Well, we have one more reading where we're going to be looking into a little bit more of what they're doing to the T cells and helping T cells fight cancer.
Today, there are patients who have survived for 18 years after a single round of immunotherapy, said Allison, who considers them cured. Once you've got T cells empowered to fight a cancer, he said, you've got that for the rest of your life. But he also acknowledged that they have not changed cancer treatment for all. While fewer than half of patients with certain cancers respond to any one immunotherapy drug, he said he is hopeful that combinations of drugs can be used together for greater effect.
So despite the safety concerns, it seems that, really a lot of patients have seen great results from this.
Well, here we start off with an example of patients who have survived for 18 years after a single round of immunotherapy. And I would say anyone who is familiar with the process of treating cancer, if you were to just have one treatment and then not have any more treatment for the cancer because the cancer doesn't come back for 18 years, I think anyone would consider that to be a pretty fantastic success.
Right. I was going to say, that's almost nothing short of a miracle.
Right.
To be able to have just one treatment and that almost kind of cured.
It's really incredible because, you think of chemotherapy. A lot of times people need to get chemotherapy for cancer, and that's never one round.
Right.
Usually chemotherapy is many, many rounds. Very few people are lucky enough to do just one round of chemotherapy and be finished.
So really, you're talking about a very powerful drug. And what is the basic thought behind this?
Well, as far as being cured, maybe from immunotherapy. So here, Allison is saying is that once you have your T cells in your body empowered to fight a certain type of cancer, and it's successful at doing so, that ability will remain with you for a long period of time, which is different from, say, radiation therapy or chemotherapy, because that depends on radiation pellets being put into your body or chemo, a drug, a chemical being put into your body. And then once you're done with that, you don't have any more cancer-fighting power of those treatments going on. But here with immunotherapy, because they're using the body's natural immune system, that would train your immune system to keep on fighting cancer.
Right. It's almost like the gift that keeps on giving. You continue to have those T cells. Now, despite how effective these are, and despite being kind of a game changer, I think a little bit you could say it's a game changer in the pharmaceutical industry. It's changed a lot of people's lives. It hasn't helped everybody.
Yeah, I think it's not a silver bullet. Silver bullet is something that is one thing can solve everything. It's definitely not a silver bullet. They can't treat all cancers. They only treat certain types of cancers. And here it says fewer than half of patients with certain cancers respond to just one immunotherapy drug. So perhaps just using one drug will not be enough. And even with use of a combination of drugs, it will not be effective for every kind of cancer, for every person with cancer.
Right. That's kind of the difficult thing. You can't cure everything.
Yeah, so I like Rebecca's use of the term silver bullet.
Yeah.
Right, because it's almost like a magical solution, right, where one thing will then take care of all your problems. Sometimes we'll also say like a magic pill, right, where you get to take the magic pill and then all your problems will be gone. But that this immunotherapy isn't that. That certainly when it works for people, it can work miraculously, right? As we saw, the people who go through the treatment once and they don't have to be treated again for 18 years or more. But that there's at least half the people that receive the treatment that don't respond to it at all,
Right.
which of course is going to be a huge disappointment for those people. But that maybe this could be sort of, even we might say like part of the toolkit that oncologists have in order to deal with cancers, where maybe there would be some immunotherapy, some other drugs, some chemo, some radiation. I do know that people will take a number of different ways to deal with cancer, especially in very dangerous or very advanced instances.
Right. And so here maybe they don't respond to any one particular immunotherapy drug, but Allison's kind of hopeful that there might be a combination of drugs that can be used together for a greater effect. And, this has been, I think, one of our more challenging lessons this month. And so, listeners, I highly encourage you to take out that article, go back through, do a bit of review, try to see if you can fully grasp the concepts that are in this. I know the panelists and myself, we spent quite a bit of time doing some research on this, right, guys?
Yes.
Doctors.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Doctors.
For sure.
Yes. And so I encourage you to dig into that. And if you want a good review, you'll notice that there's a QR code for this article for Topic Talks. You can get a review of some of the vocabulary focus words used in this article. Well, I'm so happy that we were able to just spend some time together working on a hard concept. I feel like, listeners, you've accomplished something. I've accomplished something. Josh, Rebecca, you've all accomplished something as well. And I think
we've become doctors for a day. That's
doctors
wonderful.
for a day.
That's
We
a
hope to
huge
become
accomplishment.
doctors again on the show another month.
Well, doctors, I believe it's time to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.